Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tobias Steinmann. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at EPRA, and you've just tuned into a webinar about the impact of REITs in Europe. Together, we will discuss the outcome of a research project commissioned by Amsterdam School of Real Estate on this, as I think, quite fascinating subject. Results and certain highlights will be presented by Hans Opteveld, who is a research fellow at the Amsterdam School of Real Estate, and who gathered huge expertise in this area from his former role, among other, with the PGGM, where he was head of listed real estate. Following this, we are glad to have Evert-Jan van Garderen with us, who is CEO of Euro Commercial Properties, a company in REIT with over 30 years of experience in investing and managing shopping centers in Europe, comprising prime assets. I think it's in 4 countries, Italy, France, Sweden, and Belgium. So Evert-Jan will be perfectly equipped to provide a reaction to the results from the perspective of an internationally operating REIT. We've tried to keep things short and crisp, so it's a 45-minute webinar, and you have the option to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A window during the whole session. And as a reminder, the webinar is recorded, and with that, I take the liberty in kicking it off with providing a short recap why EPRA has commissioned this project. So since REITs were introduced in the 1960s, over 40 countries with a population of nearly 5 billion people and comprising 85% of the global GDP have authorized REITs in the meantime, and REITs have become a key component of commercial real estate investment around the world, actually. So why is that? Well, they help communities grow, thrive, and revitalize, and provide an investment opportunity that makes it possible for everyday citizens as well as large institutional investors to benefit from what is valuable bricks and mortar dividend-based income and total returns. Even more, REITs play a crucial part in providing retirement security to millions of people by offering long-term investors like pension funds and insurers stable and highly competitive assets to invest in. So today there are more than 850 listed REITs operating around the globe. More than 200 of them are in Europe, and 14 European countries have already recognized the public benefit to incentivize real estate investment through public markets by introducing proper REIT legislation in their jurisdiction. We as EPRA, we consider ourselves as first point of contact when dealing with REIT frameworks, and one common response we have become aware over the years when supporting policymakers or ministry officials on either the introduction or the improvement of REIT legislation was, so the question was, what will be the impact of REITs in my jurisdiction? So it is either this or how much tax will they pay? And we've covered that in another study, which you will find on our website. So what is the impact? The impact on property markets, the impact on financial markets, the impact on societal questions. This is what we will be speaking about today, thanks to the research undertaken by Amsterdam School of Real Estate. So EPRA membership will see it first today. I think it will bring some new interesting angles to fellow REITs as well as to investors. So this is for you. But as the responsible person dealing with our dear EU institutions, we will not stop here. We will also use this report in the aftermath of the upcoming EU elections. 2024 is the year of elections. Over 3.5 billion people will vote their respective representation globally, and so will 450 million people in the European Union in early June. And as EPRA, we're seeing this as a great opportunity to raise our sector's visibility with the incoming members of the European Parliament, of the Commission, under a newly shaped political mandate. But enough from me now. I'm passing the speaker over to Hans. So Hans, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Tobias, and thank you for setting the stage. It is a pleasure to be with you today. Tobias mentioned short and crisp, and still EPRA invited me to have a chat, so that was a bad decision on their behalf, but still I'm delighted to be here with you, and I would like to thank EPRA for organizing this webinar. What I'll do is I'll run you through the research that we've conducted over the past year, and to share with you the basic outcomes of it. And the purpose of the research was really to look at the REIT effect on a holistic basis and not just at the financial attributes of REITs and REIT regimes. A lot of work already has been done by academia on that. Still, we added something to it. but we wanted to broaden the scope really to look at other financial and non-financial implications of introducing REITs. And the European space, the European REIT markets are a natural laboratory to do that. What is really interesting is that we've got REITs in a variety of countries, and all of them have the REIT structure, but they are, to a certain degree, they're also different from one another as well. So by looking closely at what they do, we can also understand a little bit better about the markets and what works and what doesn't work. And that is relevant not just to investors, but also to REIT managers, to policymakers, and to scholars proper. What I'll do is I'll walk you through a brief presentation, and I'll just share with you some of the takeaways. Now I'm going to try and open the presentation proper, which should work. If you see something else, then immediately forget about it, then it's my fault. Let's see if this works. Sharing right now, and I'm looking at you guys to nod your heads. Yes, you're nodding, so that means that we've got this presentation up. That's brilliant. So the idea was not only to look at what REITs are doing in a financial sense, but also to look at what they are doing in terms of what they do to real estate markets, financial markets more broadly than just the REIT market proper, and to society as a whole. And the real estate market effects, they are close to home, you would say, because that is just about the asset market and the way in which assets are made available to investors. The financial markets is a broader topic because financial markets, they are always of key importance to the functioning of an economy. So a proper financial market embedding of the real estate market is crucial to the wider help in the market financially. Society is obviously dependent on real estate. It's where we work, live, and play. So a functioning real estate market also is conducive to society as a whole. And what we do see is that issues like affordability are really popping up in the eye of policymakers, but also with investors. And looking at the attributes of REITs in that respect is also increasingly important. So I'll touch upon that as well. So that is in a nutshell what this research was about. And just to tell you a little bit about the construct of the research, we envisaged 3 layers. So we first looked at what does REIT adoption actually do to a market? Does it alter performance of property shares? And if so, does it do it in a way which is conducive to both investors and to policymakers as well? And the interesting thing is that policymakers, they had views on what the enactment of a REIT structure would deliver for the market. Now, in some cases, they've chosen to introduce REITs while other regimes have done it as well. But in most cases, there was a specific purpose behind that. And it's interesting to look at that purpose and to understand whether it actually has delivered on that. And the sort of basic purpose was always to provide retail investors with access to the real estate market, but there are many more attributes as well. And what we did is we had a look at REIT legislation and parliamentary discussions, and we took out of that what actually was of importance. The second layer is really about financial markets. Do REITs as such deliver added value to the financial markets? And that is not just being a liquid investment vehicle, but there's more to it. REITs are seen to be a phase of maturity in a market, and a mature market needs to have liquid alternatives to assets. And that's both true for the equity markets, and a lot of studies have been talking about the equity markets, but it's also important for the bond markets, for instance. Real estate is a capital-intensive industry, and that also means that bond markets are of importance there. The third layer I mentioned, We're seeing economies in transition. That holds true for the environmental aspect of it, but also for the social aspect of it. And we dug a little bit deeper into those effects. Okay, moving on, because time is limited. And yeah, short and crisp, come on, Tobias, that's really hard for me to do. Anyway, the purpose of policymakers when they introduced REIT legislation was really about the access to capital. I mentioned that. So people wanted to see a thriving market, and indeed we've seen significant growth in the REIT markets where REITs have been enacted. So that has been successful on that level. Having a market, that's fine, but actually what you would like to have is a stable market. So financial market stability is really something that policymakers look at. And I think that one of the key elements in there is that you don't want to see major bankruptcies in the industry, and that has not occurred in the REIT market. So that is really good. So the robustness was there when we needed it most. Now I'll come back to that in a minute or so. And to that element of having growth, you need it when there's no alternative. So you need it really when the crisis hits. And what we all know is that liquidity is hard to come by in times of crisis, and REITs can provide that. So that's been an interesting attribute of REITs. I mentioned financial market maturity in terms of the development of financial instruments. It's not just REITs we are talking about. So REITs are instruments proper, but they have equity, they have debt instruments, and they often have derivative instruments on that as well. So that adds to market maturity, it adds to the degrees of freedom that investors have, and that's important for a well-functioning financial market. And last but not least, policymakers were really looking at stable retirement saving assets. In some markets you had a buy-to-let market already in place, but you didn't have a lot of diversification material out there, and risk reduction in the REIT market really has accommodated that. Moving on, in the interest of time. Financial attributes. We did have another look at the financial attributes of REITs, and what we were particularly interested in is to see whether actually the enactment of REITs and the subsequent adoption of the REIT structure by listed real estate companies adds value. So what we basically did is we looked at the market prior to REIT enactment. So in the UK that was in 2007, and in France it was in 2003. And we asked ourselves the question, well, actually, how did the market perform prior to there being a REIT market and afterwards? And the first thing we had to do is to figure out whether the market was homogeneous before the REIT market was introduced. And to the right-hand side, there is a graph that actually shows how REITs and how non-REITs have performed through time. So we compared that performance, and what is really interesting is that even though on the surface it seems that non-REITs have had a higher return, that is more than compensated by the risk that they are running. So what we have found is that REITs actually have a higher risk-adjusted return, which is what we would have expected when we look at the policy implications. And just to zoom in a little bit about that, what we expected to find really was that prior to the introduction of REITs, and this is the case of the UK, we would find that REITs and non-REITs, or companies that are becoming REITs versus those companies that chose to not become REITs, that prior to REIT enactment they would have the same behavior, and that's indeed what we found. After REIT enactment, we do see that there is dispersion and an increasing amount of dispersion between the non-REITs and the REITs. And that's really interesting. So we do see that investors start to recognize that REITs are a different animal than non-REITs. So they reward that in a way by assigning lower risk to it. And a lower risk can be attributed to things like leverage ceilings that are being put in place, but also the fact that REITs have to pay out a large portion of their returns in the form of dividends. I won't dwell on this too much. Read the report if you're interested in learning more about that. What we're particularly interested in is whether REITs actually perform better in the run-up to becoming a REIT. And at first we thought, well, the minute at which REITs adopt their new structure, adopt the REIT structure, that is when the performance difference starts. But we were wrong, and actually we should have known that in advance, because what we actually see is that well in advance of REIT adoption, REITs start to outperform the market. That is a difficult way of saying that people recognize that REITs ought to perform better than non-REITs, and the interest in REITs actually drives up the price of REITs well in advance of a REIT actually adopting the structure. So what you see here on the right-hand side of the graph is a REIT outperformance chart, which shows from 5 years before adoption to 5 years after adoption, how REITs move versus the wider market. So versus the companies that have not become REITs. And surprise, surprise, REITs already start outperforming 5 years in advance of the decision to become a REIT. So that's really important to note, that investors clearly assign value to a REIT becoming a REIT. Moving on. Another thing which relates more to the financial market, so the second pillar of our research, was really to understand how REITs play a role in financial market stability. And as I said, this is most important when there are crises in the market, and particularly from a policy point of view. What you would like to have is a way out of a crisis. So the problem with a crisis is that if the market tanks, if the economy tanks, all the assets tank as well, and with that, liquidity tends to dry up. So if you have financial stress, then typically what you would see is that liquidity evaporates. And that's a problem, because if you've got a problem in one part of the market, and for argument's sake, let's say that it's the real estate market, you have contagion risk. And contagion risk is really something that you don't want to have, because you run the risk of one part of the market, one sector, actually demonstrating returns that are going to be to the detriment of the wider economy, and particularly between real estate and banks, that is an issue. So the ability to rebalance and access capital to relieve some of that stress is really important to policymakers, but also to the investment market, because then at least you've got a way out of an issue. And what's really interesting is that REITs have proven to be the vehicle of choice when it comes to real estate crises. And this is on the right-hand side, the chart which shows you the IPO activity in the European real estate market. And REIT IPOs have concentrated in a period of time just after the global financial crisis. And that was exactly because of the transfer of assets from distressed financial players into the public markets. This is not new. The same concept actually has taken place in the US in the 1990s, and in Asia in 1997 after the Asian financial crisis. You see that REITs actually pick up some of the distressed assets and resolve that by providing public market access to it. So in countries where there have been bad banks, like in Ireland, NAMA, and Spain, SAREB, REITs have been the vehicles of choice to transfer the ownership towards the public markets. And in those countries that did not have bad banks, like the UK, we've seen commercial banks actually using REITs as the conduit through which the assets have been brought to the market. So this ability to resolve crises has been really important. Lastly, How about the societal effects of it? The markets and investors are looking quite clearly at more than just the financial attributes of the companies they invest in nowadays. Actually, most of them look at the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, to look at their investments and ask themselves the question, actually, do investments contribute to a better world? Now, the UN SDGs are widely used, and they're also embedded in some of the regulation. When you think about the regulatory environment in the EU, the SFDR regulation, but also the EU taxonomy have been based on some of the UN SDG ideas. The UN SDGs have been adopted by many of the REITs since their arrival in 2015. And it's really important that we think about the role of REITs in society. It is a big economic sector, but also real estate is a very important source of carbon emissions, for instance, but also from a social aspect, it's important that REITs think about things like affordable housing and the ability to have access to things like healthcare. So of these sustainable development goals, there's a variety of goals that is of importance specifically to real estate and the REIT market in particular. And I listed them here. You've got SDG 3, 4, 7, 11, and 15 that all are relevant to REITs. Now, the emphasis of the real-world impact of what you're investing in is of increasing importance. It's of importance to investors, it's of importance to policymakers, and therefore it is worthwhile spending time on it and understanding what REITs can do. The interesting thing is that REITs can do certain things that other real estate players cannot do. They can be on the forefront of change. The reason why is that they have access to permanent capital, so the ability to be in the market for a prolonged period of time is of importance. Also, the size of REITs is second to none. So REITs can actually embark on projects that others find hard to access. And typically, and that's what we see in our research, is that REITs have had a lot of projects in which they work with governments, and that may be municipalities, but it also may on a country level, but where long-term projects that raise the standard of living in a certain neighborhood, city, or even in the whole country are improving. So that's really important. And obviously, that's of importance to everybody because as people, we all use the assets that are being put there by and are invested in by REITs, but also because we are going through transition, and in that transition to a carbon neutral economy, it is really relevant that investors do play a role in this, and REITs are well positioned to do that. So that's really of importance. So the bottom line really is that REITs do have a purpose in society that they serve, and I think that they could work on that and being explicit about that. Economies are served by REITs. They are bringing stable financial returns. They support the economy at large. But the stability of the economies is just one thing. It also is important that the society that is subject to change is being helped by REITs to make that change happen, and transitioning from let's say from the carbon-based economies that we used to have towards energy neutral environment is something that you cannot do without the real estate sector, and as leaders in the field, you cannot do without the REITs. So I think that one of the key conclusions of our research was that we need to emphasize this, and we need to work more on using this to further the goals of policymakers, but also of increasingly of investors who are selecting assets based on their real-world impact. I'll leave it at that in the interest of time and hand over to Evert-Jan.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hans, for this nice piece of research and the presentation. And yeah, when I read your report, Hans, which was very interesting, but I was particularly very enthusiastic about the third layer, which you just commented on, the contribution of REITs to European society, because I think there we can maybe link it also to an ambition we have in Europe with our REITs. The European sector, I think, has the ambition to grow, and not only grow, but maybe also looking at what is globally happening to REITs is that we obviously want to become probably a bit more important than we are today compared to the US and to Asia. And I think this is probably a unique selling point almost we have as European REITs to show that we can really be a sector with clear ESG goals, with clear ESG reporting, also clear ESG results. And on the back of that, I think those investors, and whether they are European or elsewhere in the world, who really are interested and take care about what is happening in terms of ESG, then I think the European sector can offer something special. We are at the front already with a lot of the REITs who report for a number of years on ESG. Also now are subject to limited assurance. Some of us are about to produce information which is then subject to that kind of audit or beginning of audit. And I think there we really have to focus on, because we can offer something extra. And we all know, as you just said, there's a lot of carbon emissions coming from real estate. We have a big job to do, but I think we can move the needle. So if we take advantage of this position, and I know many of us, we are also, of course, preparing ourselves for further ESG reporting. And of course, it's not so easy. There are many things you have to put in place, and it will take a big effort. But anyhow, if we do this, but link it also to this unique offer we can make to investors around the world, I think it is all to our benefit. And don't forget, EPRA already introduced in 2011, I think, the first best practices for sustainability reporting. And that obviously took off, and nowadays most of our members report in line with these practices. So we have quite a record already. And now maybe the practices will be reshaped a bit because we get so much regulation from the EU. But anyhow, we are used to already report. So let's take advantage of that. And I'm very happy you produced this piece of research emphasizing this third layer, which I think we should grab and should use together with EPRA, all our members, and to get the European REIT sector in the growth mode again. That would be something, which of course we all admire, and I think that's the big takeaway from your research. But then I'm only one of many REITs, so.
Yeah, no, but so you made an interesting point there, which is about the sort of the regulation, which is, I think people find that to be difficult to deal with. At the same time, it might be a blessing in disguise as well, in the sense that when you look at sort of the European REIT sector, it's really fascinating that there's so much information out there. And the research we've done, we could not have done if there's nothing there. So the reporting is actually pretty good on the standards in Europe. When you would go outside of Europe, and we're dabbling with that at the moment, for instance in Asia and the US, there's nothing there really. So it's very hard to to do the same thing elsewhere. And I think that is a huge attraction of the European market, as investors are looking for this. And we know that some of the larger institutional investors are starting to select assets on that particular basis, that they have a sense of what is actually being achieved by those companies, and how can we benefit from what it is they are doing, and that trickles down into the market. So that may lead to people gravitating towards the people and the REITs that actually have that kind of reporting in place and are able to demonstrate what their added value is in society. And I think people tend to look at that just by looking at certain sectors, like the healthcare sector, so healthcare REITs. But I think there is a much broader issue at hand here, where there's pressures on affordability, but also the challenges of the transformation of the economy, which requires a lot of capital. So how do you achieve that? I think this is part of the answer there.
Yeah, and I think also what your research shows is that you just mentioned healthcare, but we have seen social housing, we see science centers, all that kind of relatively new specific real estate companies who then serve one of these goals you refer to of the United Nations. I think again that's also helping us to grow in Europe, because let's say at the moment it's relatively maybe still a small percentage, but they are growing. We know that, and on the back of that, the sector in Europe can grow, and therefore we become more relevant in indices, in what have you, in global mandates. So I really think that's also a big plus, and you have stressed that again in this study, and I think we should also pay attention to that, because that's the way forward, I think, to make more successful European REITs than we are today. It's all about being relevant and staying relevant, or becoming even more relevant. In the end, we're a capital-intensive industry. We need capital. We need investors.
Yeah, and I think, and particularly, sort of when you look at some of the challenges, societal challenges, then more capital is needed. And I think that when you look at how governments think about this, they will have to really decide for themselves where to put the public money to work, and where we will need private money. And in the report, what we also did is look at some of the larger projects, and some of them are really interesting in terms of the sheer size of it, but also the way in which municipalities and REITs work together, leveraging each other's expertise to figure out how to restructure a city. And I guess that one of the things that we didn't think about as much before was the role that also retail companies like yourselves have, as the locations that are conducive to high footfall are also the locations where you need mobility. And guess what? So the whole mobility structure is changing. So the challenges in the infrastructure market go hand in hand with the real estate part of things. And we put some examples in there, but there's numerous examples that we could put in there. And I think in that sense also, by the way, Europe is different from the rest of the world, because in Europe you have concentrated city exposures, whereas typically outside of Europe you would have the large out-of-town malls, for instance. There you don't have that same mobility issue. Well, it's rather more challenging because you have different mobility issues. And I think that is really exciting about this.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, Hans. I don't know, are there meanwhile any questions which have arrived? I can't see that, but
There were a couple of comments, yes. So that this piece of research should be presented to particular governments, including yours, when they are going to be formed, and this will be taken care of. There is a comment which I think is interesting about the growth of the European market, that it basically has, as you've been lining out, Hans, that there are two factors, which is, well, the one about the structure of a REIT itself leading to the IPOs, but also about that resolution of distress. I think that is a fascinating subject, at least from a policy perspective. I think that has never been well put into the limelight before. That in the end, well, that these bad banks had the possibility to resell into the market, and REITs offered a solution to this issue. I think this is a fascinating one, and it perfectly resonates also what we had seen before in terms of resolution distress. Not about that angle you have been pointing out for the first time, but after the global financial crisis, I think there were like 0 bankruptcies within the FTSE EPRA Developed Europe Index, which was, and I recall that from, this is a policy issue, and it's coming up again and again throughout the years. There's still the kind of stigma, or you're working in real estate. So for laymen, and policymakers are very often that they have that stamp when it comes to real estate. But listed real estate did perfectly fine. There were 0 bankruptcies in the index, and that was contrasting very strongly with the unlisted sector, where there were, I think it was a fifth of all the closed-end funds that had been launched in 2007, and these had to be wound up. So that angle, I think, is a very fascinating one.
And then, if I may add to that, I think that the key thing that we found was that you can always argue, well, if there's an issue in the real estate sector, then the real estate guys should sort it out themselves. But there's a wider issue here, because real estate is such an important economic sector that you will have contagion in the financial markets. So if you don't have a vehicle for resolution, then it clogs up the banking system, and then you've got an even bigger issue, because then you might have the banking sector at risk. And that's a real risk that we've seen in the past. Now, on the one hand, that's already embedded in the REIT structure, because in many countries we have leverage ceilings for REITs. But also because of the nature of REITs themselves as vehicles, REITs typically don't have a tendency to push the leverage to their limits, and that's obvious. And still, that is being forgotten about. That is actually a pretty safe way of doing it. And we're doing some follow-up research, and we look at, okay, what has happened to the leverage levels of companies, and is it actually interesting to see that it's dropping, not rising, as a result of this. And it's not being pushed as such. So that's quite important. It also is demonstrated by the fact that REITs typically have higher credit ratings than non-REITs that may have a credit rating or not. But REITs are much more likely to use the public market for their financing, and with that comes the scrutiny of credit ratings. And REITs are certainly well aware of the importance of having a decent credit rating. So we do see that the quality of the debt is quite a bit higher than the average quality of debt in the sector. So that's quite helpful. So you do have a combination of factors that creates this stability.
Okay, thank you. You're speaking about quality. Here is a question from one of our French REIT members, speaking that they have created their own comprehensive impact report measuring impact at European country and asset level. And they have a question about, so they did it along 4 pillars: economic, environmental, social, and societal. And they have a question about how to measure our 3rd pillar. So the question is, although the United Nations Development Goals are useful to qualify, did you find research on how to quantify?
Yeah, no, that's wearing a different hat. That's my daily bread and butter. I spend time on. What is really important, I think, is that if you quantify that you do it in a genuine way, and that people understand the approach that you take. There's a ton of research on approaches, but that's all academia, and that's nice and fine. But if you have to put it in practice, that's a different topic. So, what we've spent time on is thinking about this, and there is a number of rules that apply that I'm sure that they know as well. You've got the Global Impact Investing Network, for instance, that put out some ideas on that. But what is really essential is that you can translate what it is you're doing to real world effects, and how to measure these is always a bit of a art and a science. But there's some rules that apply, and that's also the fine line that REITs are faced with. They have to do this in such a way that you're not being accused of greenwashing, but that you give a solid representation of what it is that you're doing. And I guess that more and more REITs embark on this. So certainly what we've seen is that since the UN SDGs got produced in 2015, in 2016 there were only 2 European REITs that picked up on them. Interestingly, those were 2 Belgian REITs. I don't know why that was, but then it quickly grew, and by now what we see is that the overwhelming majority uses this framework to specify what it is that they're doing. And what is really important, I think, is that people are specific about what they want to achieve and monitor that. But also, as an industry, it's a call for making sure that we all get on the same page, so we learn to speak the same language. And I think that is a role that that we should take upon ourselves as the industry, and where EPRA also could play an important role in furthering that.
Yeah, Hans, I think that's a very clear message which you gave in your report, and I think we should pick that absolutely as a prime target for now. I know we're all very busy. EPRA is very busy, but I'm afraid it will even get a bit more busy in the near future when we, as an industry headed by EPRA, really have to make sure we connect, and we are of course connected, but do connect with policymakers, engage with them, explain what role we have as REITs, and make sure that we get the reporting in such a shape that we can be very clear on what we're doing, what we are reporting, what are the results. And I think that is a good message you give in this report. So I'm sure EPRA will take this further. I was just before this webinar browsing through the guidance they gave on the EU taxonomy. I mean, it's huge, of course, and I'm sure there will be more of that reports, but we need to really get grips with that and make sure that we turn it into what I say is a unique selling point for Europe, for European REITs, so that we are becoming more attractive than we are today for the reasons we discussed.
I have nothing to add anymore, Evert-Jan. I think there was even a very nice final sentence to this webinar. You can see on the right side that Roxana was sharing to, well, in case you're more interested into getting into the details, and there are 2 layers of details. So there's the full technical report where you can have all the methodologies, and there is a shorter version which might be a bit more snappy. You can find that on our website. And as mentioned, yes, we will certainly make use of both of these reports, depending on the kind of stakeholder we have. And yeah, there will be an interesting time following then the elections in June. I think we are very timely with that research, and there has been some very fresh angles that haven't been well put into the limelight before. So thank you very much, both. Thank you, Hans, for that great work. Thank you, Evert-Jan, to give a first-hand response to that from a practical perspective. And yeah, we will make our best as the spearhead, as the trade association, to bring that out to our stakeholders. And with that, yes, so the open questions, I think it's not too many left, but the ones that are left, we will get back to you individually. And yeah, with that, I thank you again and see you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.